The world was on the brink of chaos, but no one saw it coming. It started with whispers, strange reports about a viral outbreak in distant countries. The virus, dubbed R virus, spread quickly, infecting the population with alarming speed. But by the time the governments realized the scale of the threat, it was too late. People began turning into mindless, ravenous creatures. The dead walked again, feasting on the living. It wasn't just a virus anymore, it was the end of civilization as they knew it. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, Rachel, a determined schoolteacher, found herself grappling with the reality of the outbreak. She had never been a fan of chaos, but now it seemed that chaos was her only choice. Her family, including her younger brother, Jake, and her best friend, Sarah, had taken refuge in her home. They had gathered supplies in a makeshift bunker and locked all the doors and windows. The threat outside seemed distant at first, a nightmare playing out in the farthest corners of the earth. But then the first scream pierced the air. It was close, and it was real. Rachel's first instinct was to run, but she quickly realized that her neighborhood had been overrun. She and her family were trapped. The sounds of distant groaning and the occasional crash echoed through the streets. The world had changed in an instant. One moment, it was life as usual, the next, it was survival mode, with no time for goodbyes. "Rachel, what do we do?" Jake's voice trembled, pulling her from her thoughts. He was barely 13, too young to be caught in this nightmare, and yet here they were. Rachel took a deep breath, her mind racing. "We stay here for now," she said, her voice firm. "We wait until nightfall. We'll have to make a run for the store tomorrow morning. Supplies are low. We can't afford to wait any longer." Sarah, who had been standing by the window, turned around, her face pale. "What if they break in? What if we're not safe here anymore?" Rachel could see the fear in Sarah's eyes. They'd been friends for years, but the apocalypse was a different kind of monster, one that tested even the closest bonds. She forced herself to stay calm. "We have to trust each other. Trust is the only thing keeping us from falling apart. If we can't rely on one another, we have no chance out there." But even as Rachel spoke, a gnawing feeling formed in her stomach. She had always been the dependable one, the one everyone relied on. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that not all of them were as trustworthy as they seemed. The night passed in uneasy silence. The constant sounds of the undead outside the walls kept them awake, but it was the subtle tension between Rachel and her companions that gnawed at her the most. Trust was fragile, and it was slipping through her fingers. In the dead of night, she noticed something unsettling. Sarah's bags weren't where they had been earlier. They were gone. Rachel's heart raced as she moved cautiously towards Sarah's sleeping bag, her breath catching in her throat. She had to be imagining things. But no, Sarah's gear was missing. There was only one explanation. Rachel's mind screamed for an answer. Had Sarah planned to leave them? Was she going to make a run for it alone, leaving them behind to fend for themselves? Before she could act on her suspicions, the sound of footsteps echoed through the darkened house, drawing her attention to the front door. It creaked open, and the shadow of a figure loomed outside. Rachel held her breath. The figure moved closer, closer, until the silhouette became clear. It was Sarah. Rachel's breath left her in a rush, a mixture of relief and confusion flooding her. What was going on? Where had she gone? Sarah stepped into the light, her face twisted in a look of desperation. "I had to do it," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I found something that could help us. But we have to move fast." Rachel froze. "What are you talking about?" Sarah looked around nervously. "I don't trust the others. There's something not right. We need to leave now, before it's too late." Rachel's mind spun. What was Sarah saying? Could the situation really be as bad as she made it sound? As much as Rachel wanted to believe in her, a new kind of fear seeped into her bones. What if Sarah had already made her choice? What if betrayal was already in motion, and Rachel was the last to realize it? Rachel's grip tightened around the handgun she kept by her side. Her gut told her that something was wrong, But with the world outside crumbling, Rachel was beginning to question everything, even the people she loved. Trust was slipping away faster than they could hold on to it. "Trust me, Rachel," Sarah said softly, her eyes pleading for understanding. "We need to leave now." Rachel felt the weight of the decision heavy on her shoulders. The world outside was dangerous, but inside the house, betrayal seemed to lurk in every shadow. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at Sarah. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Sarah had always been a reliable friend, but the fear and desperation in her eyes seemed too intense to ignore. Rachel felt herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, uncertainty, confusion, and the ever-present fear that someone might be lying to her. In the midst of an apocalypse, trust was the most valuable currency, and right now, Rachel wasn't sure who she could trust. "Sarah, what exactly did you find?" Rachel asked, trying to steady her voice, though the tremor was hard to conceal. Sarah hesitated for a moment, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to be listening. Her words came in a hurried whisper, "There's a safe house. It's a few miles from here, hidden away in the old church. I overheard some survivors talking about it before the outbreak spread. They say it's stocked with supplies and has a strong security system." Rachel looked at her, trying to process the information. A safe house. It was a glimmer of hope, but there were so many unanswered questions. Why hadn't Sarah mentioned it before? What if this was just another trap, another lie in a world where betrayal was all too common? Jake, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, suddenly spoke up. "Are we really going to trust her, Rachel? We don't know anything about this safe house. What if it's a trap?" Rachel's eyes softened as she turned toward her younger brother. He was scared, and rightfully so. The apocalypse had taken away everything they knew, and trust had become a fragile thread they were all trying to hold on to. "I don't know, Jake," she admitted, her voice low. "But we don't have many options. We either stay here and wait for the zombies to come, or we take the risk and move out." Sarah's expression shifted, her pleading eyes softening. "I'm not lying, Rachel. I swear on everything. This is our best chance to survive. The more time we spend here, the more dangerous it becomes. We have to go." Rachel looked around at the others, Jake, Sarah, and their makeshift group of survivors, and felt a pang of doubt. She had always been the one to hold the group together, to make decisions that protected everyone. But now, everything felt out of control. Every decision seemed like a gamble, and the stakes had never been higher. "All right," Rachel said after a long pause, making a decision that felt like it might be her last. "We go. But we need a plan. We can't just rush into this blindly." The group huddled together in the small living room, using whatever light they had left, a flickering candle, a dim flashlight. The air was thick with tension as Rachel outlined a plan. "We'll leave at first light. The streets are too dangerous to navigate in the dark. We'll move quietly, stay off the main roads, and keep our distance from any zombies. We don't know how many are out there, so we'll stick to the alleys and back streets." Jake spoke up again, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if someone tries to follow us? What if one of us gets caught?" Rachel's eyes narrowed. "We can't afford to get caught. If it comes down to it, we leave anyone behind. No one is getting left behind on purpose, but we don't have time to be heroes." The gravity of her words hit everyone hard. The idea of leaving someone behind in a world overrun by the undead was unthinkable. But Rachel knew that the survival of the group depended on each person being able to move fast and remain undetected. There were no second chances in this new world. As they finalized the details of their escape plan, Rachel's mind kept returning to one thing, the nagging feeling that Sarah wasn't being completely honest. There was a hint of urgency in Sarah's voice, something that felt forced, almost too desperate. Why hadn't Sarah mentioned the safe house sooner? Why hadn't anyone else in the group heard about it? And why was Sarah suddenly so insistent on leaving now, when things had been quiet for the past few days? Rachel couldn't shake the suspicion gnawing at her gut. But she didn't have time to dwell on it. The clock was ticking. Every second they spent inside the house, the more likely the zombies would find them. They had to move. The group prepared for the escape. They gathered weapons, checked their supplies, and tried to prepare mentally for the dangerous journey ahead. The house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. The walls seemed to close in on them as the weight of the decision pressed down. Trust had become a luxury, and Rachel wasn't sure if she could afford it anymore. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, Rachel led the group outside. The world had changed. What was once familiar was now unrecognizable. The streets were eerily quiet, but that only made them more dangerous. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every sound was a reminder that the world they knew was gone forever. They moved in silence, keeping to the alleys as planned, but Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Was Sarah telling the truth? Or was she leading them into a trap? There was no way to know for sure. All Rachel could do was keep moving forward, and hope that, somehow, the group would make it through. The sun had barely risen, and already the world felt different. The once bustling neighborhood was now a ghost town, streets abandoned, houses boarded up, and the only sounds were the distant groans of the undead roaming aimlessly in search of the living. Rachel led the way, with Jake close behind, his small frame dwarfed by the heavy backpack strapped to his back. Sarah followed, her face a mask of determination, though Rachel couldn't help but notice the slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted her weapon. The group moved quietly, their footsteps muffled by the debris littering the streets. They kept their heads down, avoiding any windows or open doors, knowing that one wrong move could attract the attention of the undead. Rachel had led the way through countless drills as a teacher, but this was no classroom lesson. This was real. The stakes had never been higher. "I don't like this," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. His wide eyes darted nervously around, scanning the empty streets for any sign of movement. "It's too quiet." Rachel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, though she, too, felt a growing unease. She glanced over her shoulder at Sarah, who seemed to be walking just a little too fast, her footsteps a little too deliberate. Rachel's suspicions were growing by the minute. Sarah had been acting strangely ever since they'd agreed to leave the house. "We just need to stay focused, Jake," Rachel said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's better when it's quiet. The less attention we draw, the better." The group pressed on, moving in the shadows of the buildings, hoping to remain unseen by the zombies that now roamed the streets. The thought of being spotted was terrifying. The undead didn't think, didn't strategize. They were relentless, single-minded in their hunger for flesh. And if they encountered a large group of them, escape would be impossible. After a few hours of cautious travel, the group found themselves at the edge of the neighborhood. The tall buildings of the city loomed in the distance, but it was the stretch of open road between them and safety that caused Rachel's heart to race. The area was desolate, no cover for miles. There was no way they would make it without being noticed. "We'll have to cross the highway," Rachel said, her voice tense. "It's the only way to get to the next block. But we need to be quick." Everyone nodded silently. There was no arguing. Rachel had become their leader by default. She had the most experience, the most confidence, even if that confidence was now starting to waver. They had to trust each other, even if the cracks in their unity were starting to show. As they crept toward the edge of the road, Rachel felt her pulse quicken. Her eyes scanned the area, searching for any signs of movement. A few abandoned cars were parked along the side of the highway, their windows shattered and doors ajar. It was as if time had frozen the moment the outbreak hit. Just as they were about to step onto the road, a faint sound caught Rachel's attention. A low, guttural moan. "Zombies," she whispered urgently, pulling the group to a halt. They ducked behind a wrecked car, hearts pounding in their chests. Rachel could hear the unmistakable shuffle of footsteps, slow but deliberate. The undead were getting closer. She motioned for everyone to stay still, holding her breath. Each second felt like an eternity. A shadow passed over the wreckage they hid behind. Rachel's stomach churned as she saw a group of zombies moving in the opposite direction, oblivious to their presence. There were 5 of them, stumbling along in a single file, their eyes glazed over, their mouths slack. Rachel knew that they couldn't stay hidden forever. The moment the zombies were out of sight, they would have to make a break for it, across the open highway, with no cover in sight. Her heart was hammering in her chest as she weighed the risk. If they waited too long, they would be trapped here, with nowhere to go. The zombies stumbled further down the road, and Rachel gave the signal. Now. They dashed across the highway, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. The road stretched out before them like an endless chasm, a no-man's land that seemed to stretch on forever. Rachel's legs burned as she pushed herself harder, her mind focused solely on the task at hand. There was no turning back now. Just as they reached the halfway point, a piercing screech shattered the silence. One of the zombies had turned, its vacant eyes locking onto them. It let out a loud, guttural cry that echoed across the highway. The others followed, drawn to the sound. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. The horde was coming. "Run," she shouted, adrenaline surging through her body. Her legs felt like they might give out under the pressure, but she didn't dare stop. The group sprinted the rest of the way, with the sound of shuffling footsteps growing louder behind them. The zombies were closing in. But just as they reached the cover of the next block of buildings, Rachel looked over her shoulder and saw something that made her blood run cold. Sarah was lagging behind. Rachel's heart raced even faster. She saw Sarah stumble, her foot catching on something, and in that moment, the group's trust, already fragile, began to unravel. "Sarah!" Rachel screamed, but it was too late. Sarah's face twisted in a moment of sheer panic as she looked up and realized the zombies were nearly upon her. With a final, desperate glance toward Rachel and the others, Sarah turned and ran, pushing through the pain, trying to put distance between herself and the undead. The group reached the next building just as the horde reached the highway. They turned to see Sarah sprinting, a sea of zombies chasing her. But something was off. Sarah wasn't just running for survival. She was running with purpose, with desperation. Rachel's gut twisted. She had trusted Sarah, but now, it seemed like there was something more to this escape than she had realized. The echoes of Sarah's scream faded into the distance, swallowed by the horrifying growls of the undead. Rachel's chest tightened as she stared in disbelief, her eyes wide, heart pounding. For a moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion, Sarah's figure, once a trusted friend, now a shadow on the horizon, surrounded by the snarling horde. The chaos of the moment struck Rachel like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her. "Rachel, we need to go." Jake's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back into the present. His face was pale, his expression wide-eyed with terror. The rest of the group, now safely behind the cover of the building, looked to her for guidance, but the only thing Rachel could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal pressing down on her. "Go!" Rachel snapped, snapping into action. "Move now!" They sprinted through the alleyway, adrenaline coursing through Rachel's veins as she pushed her body to its limits. But her mind was elsewhere, on Sarah. On the way Sarah had fled, leaving them behind in the middle of a life-or-death situation. She couldn't understand it. Why hadn't Sarah called out for help? Why hadn't she tried to stick together? Rachel's suspicions had been growing for days now, but she had ignored them, pushed them down, and trusted her friend. But that trust was shattered in an instant. Sarah had run. And Rachel realized now, too late, that Sarah had never really intended to stay with them, she had always been planning to abandon them. Why would she leave us? Jake's voice trembled as he tried to keep pace with Rachel, his small legs struggling to keep up. Rachel didn't have an answer. She didn't know why Sarah had turned on them, but the facts were clear. Sarah had seen an opportunity to save herself, and she'd taken it. There was no other explanation. The way Sarah had hurriedly dragged them into the plan, the way she had been insistent on leaving when the group was still uncertain, it had all been leading up to this moment. "We'll figure it out later," Rachel said, her voice low but resolute. "Right now, we need to focus on getting to the safe house." But even as she spoke the words, Rachel knew the truth. There was no safe house. Not anymore. If Sarah had known about it, she had clearly abandoned it. That place was nothing but a lie, a trap, meant to lure them out of hiding. Sarah had either known it was dangerous or, worse, she had planned to betray them all along. The thought of it sent a chill through Rachel, one that would linger in her bones for a long time. The group pushed forward, the sound of distant groans becoming a constant presence at their backs. They couldn't afford to linger in one place for too long. The world outside was becoming increasingly hostile, and every minute spent hesitating made it more likely they would be caught by a wandering horde. They reached an abandoned grocery store after a few more blocks. It was dark inside, but the windows were still intact, offering some protection from the outside world. Rachel motioned for the group to enter, keeping her eyes trained on the streets as they slipped inside, one by one. Once inside, Rachel pulled the door closed behind them and quickly barricaded it with whatever she could find. Cans, shelves, pieces of broken wood, nothing that would hold up indefinitely, but enough to give them some time. "We need to rest," Rachel said, trying to sound calm despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. She needed to think, to regroup. "But we can't stay here long. We have to keep moving. The longer we're in one place, the more likely it is that we'll be found." Jake nodded, but his eyes were clouded with confusion. "Rachel, why did Sarah leave us? Why would she just run?" Rachel could hear the pain in his voice. He had trusted Sarah, too. They all had. But now, she was gone, leaving them with only questions and a shattered sense of security. It was hard to admit, but Rachel knew that there was no going back. They couldn't afford to keep second-guessing themselves. They had to survive, and the only way to do that was to push forward, no matter what. As the group settled into the relative safety of the grocery store, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah wasn't just running to escape the zombies. There was something more to her betrayal, something deeper that she didn't understand. Sarah had been with them since the beginning. She had known the risks, the dangers, and yet she had chosen this path. It didn't add up. Rachel sat down in the corner of the store, her mind racing. The shelves were stocked with canned goods and bottled water, enough to keep them fed for a few days, at least. But that wasn't the real issue. The real issue was Sarah. What had she known? Was she working with someone else? Or had she simply decided that Rachel and the others were expendable? Her thoughts were interrupted when the distant growl of zombies reached her ears. She stood up quickly, motioning for the group to gather. There was no time for resting. They had to keep moving. The world had become a dangerous place, and trust was a luxury they couldn't afford anymore. "Let's go," Rachel said, her voice firm. "We don't have time to waste. We keep moving, or we'll become just like the rest of them." She glanced one last time at the door, as if expecting Sarah to walk through it. But deep down, she knew Sarah was gone. And with her departure, Rachel understood something crucial: trust was broken. The rules of survival had changed. No one was safe. Not even from the ones they had once called family. Rachel turned toward the others. "We stick together. We survive together. But from now on, no one gets to make decisions alone." They had no choice but to move forward, to keep fighting. But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. There were more betrayals ahead, more lies yet to unravel. And in the world they now lived in, trust was a dangerous thing. The harsh light of day began to fade as the group moved deeper into the abandoned city, the shadows lengthening as the sun set. The night was creeping in, and with it, a chilling sense of urgency. Every street corner, every alley, felt like it was closing in on them. Rachel had always known that survival in this new world meant adapting quickly, but the weight of Sarah's betrayal hung heavily in the air, slowing them down. Every step, every breath, felt like a constant reminder that trust was now a luxury, one they could no longer afford. The group had been on the move for hours, weaving through empty streets and deserted buildings. It felt like they were constantly running, always looking over their shoulders. The world outside had become a labyrinth of dangers, and with every passing moment, it became more clear, they weren't just running from the zombies anymore. They were running from something else. Something more dangerous than the undead themselves. Rachel was exhausted, but she couldn't afford to show it. The others looked to her for guidance, and if she faltered now, they might falter too. But she could feel the pressure building, the weight of responsibility, the fear that each decision could be their last. The constant tension was eating at her. How had everything gone so wrong? The last time she had seen Sarah, she was running toward the zombies. But why? What had been her true intention? Was she really just trying to save herself, or was there something more to this betrayal? Rachel, look, Jake's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see Jake pointing down the street, his eyes wide with alarm. There, in the distance, the unmistakable shuffle of zombies filled the horizon. They were moving in their direction, too many to count, drawn to the noise and movement of the city. The horde had begun to swarm, and there was no escaping them. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. We need to move, now. She turned to the group, her mind racing. There were only a few options left: hide, fight, or run. Hiding might buy them time, but only for a short while. Fighting was a last resort, and they were woefully unprepared for a stand against a horde of that size. Running, though risky, was the only choice. They had to stay ahead of the zombies. She grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him close. Listen, we need to get to the tunnels beneath the city. They're our best shot at losing them. It's the old subway system. There's an entrance a few blocks from here. Jake's eyes widened with fear. Are you sure? That's underground. Rachel nodded grimly. It's the best we've got. They quickly began to make their way toward the tunnels, moving in a hurried, yet deliberate pace. The horde was growing closer with every passing second, and the sound of their moaning and groaning reverberated through the streets. Rachel's ears rang with the constant drone of the undead, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. As they approached the entrance to the subway station, a crackling sound filled the air. The unmistakable hum of the undead had become a constant in the background of their lives, a reminder that safety was always fleeting. The station was old, abandoned long before the outbreak, and the walls were crumbling, covered in graffiti and layers of dust. But it was still intact, and that was all that mattered now. The group rushed into the darkness, Rachel leading the way as they descended the crumbling stairs. The air in the tunnels was musty, thick with the scent of decay and damp earth. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the only sound was the frantic echo of their footsteps. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, Rachel's mind raced. The tunnels were vast, twisting, and labyrinthine, with no clear way to know where they led. It had been years since she had last been down here, and she knew the risks. But at this point, it was their only option. They had to keep moving forward. Stay close, she instructed, her voice low and steady. The dim light from their flashlights flickered as they moved deeper into the tunnel, the darkness swallowing them whole. Jake, walking at her side, clutched the strap of his backpack tightly. What if we get lost down here? What if the zombies find us? Rachel didn't have an answer for him. She could hear the desperation in his voice, feel the weight of his fear pressing down on her. She felt the same way. There was no safe place anymore. But the tunnels, with their hidden paths and dead ends, offered them a chance. A chance to lose the horde. They moved quickly, the echo of their footsteps now mingling with the distant sound of the zombies above them. Rachel couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of her mind that they were still being followed. The fact that Sarah had abandoned them so easily made Rachel wonder if they were being led into another trap. The doubt gnawed at her, refusing to be silenced. As they reached a long, narrow stretch of tunnel, Rachel stopped. We need to rest. Just for a minute. The group settled against the cold, damp walls of the subway tunnel, each person too exhausted to speak. Rachel's eyes scanned the darkness around them, her mind still working overtime. The thought of Sarah lingered like a ghost, but she pushed it aside for the moment. There were more immediate concerns, like how they were going to survive the night, and whether the horde above them had lost their trail. Suddenly, a faint sound caught Rachel's attention, the distant moan of a zombie, too close for comfort. Her blood ran cold. The tunnel wasn't as safe as she had hoped. They had to keep moving. But this time, she wasn't just worried about the zombies. She was worried about something worse, the possibility that Sarah wasn't just a victim of the apocalypse. She might be part of it. And that meant there was no one left she could truly trust. "Move out," Rachel ordered, her voice sharp. "We need to go." The group stood, their movements stiff and slow from exhaustion, but they pressed on. The journey ahead was unknown, but there was no turning back. Not anymore. Rachel's eyes were fixed straight ahead, but in the back of her mind, a question continued to echo: how far would Sarah go to survive, and who else might be willing to betray them to get ahead? The air in the tunnels was suffocating, thick with the smell of mold and rot. Rachel's eyes scanned the darkness ahead, every distant noise causing her heart to race. She could hear the faint echoes of footsteps from the others behind her, but she knew that no one was truly safe in this place. The fear, the doubt, the constant tension, it was all too much to bear. The subway tunnels were a cold, lifeless labyrinth, and as they trudged deeper into the underground maze, Rachel felt the creeping sense that something far worse than zombies lurked just beyond their reach. The group had been walking for hours, the dim light of their flashlights barely cutting through the heavy shadows that clung to the walls. They had stopped only once to catch their breath, but every time they rested, Rachel couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that the zombies had somehow found their trail. The moans of the undead seemed to reverberate through the tunnels, echoing off the stone walls, a constant reminder that they weren't alone down here. Jake's voice suddenly broke through her thoughts. "Rachel, we have to talk." She turned to face him, her breath catching in her throat. Jake's eyes were wide, and his expression was haunted, as if he was holding something back, something important. "What's wrong?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her own insides. Jake hesitated, clearly struggling with his words. "It's about Sarah. There's something I didn't tell you earlier." Rachel's stomach tightened, her chest squeezing with anxiety. She had been trying to push Sarah from her mind, but now, hearing Jake's words, she knew that something was seriously wrong. She could feel her heart race as she stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's gaze shifted nervously to the others, as if checking to make sure they weren't listening. When he was sure they were alone, he leaned in closer, his voice trembling with fear. "Before we got separated, before Sarah ran, she said something. Something strange." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "What did she say?" Jake swallowed hard, his face pale. "She said, 'I'm not one of them, but I'm not one of you either.'" The words hit Rachel like a slap to the face. She felt the blood drain from her own face as she processed what Jake had said. Not one of them, but not one of us either. Those words echoed in her mind, each syllable heavy with an unsettling implication. What did Sarah mean by that? Was she saying she wasn't human anymore, or was it something darker? The confusion and fear surged in her chest, tightening around her heart. Rachel's voice was barely audible as she spoke. "Did you tell anyone else?" Jake shook his head quickly. "No, I didn't. I didn't want to cause a panic. I wasn't sure if she was just scared, or if it meant something more. But I couldn't shake it, Rachel. It's like, she knew something we didn't." Rachel's thoughts raced. Sarah's sudden, unexplained flight from the group had never made sense, but now it was becoming clear. Sarah had known something, something that Rachel hadn't understood until now. Sarah had been part of something bigger. Maybe she had been involved in some plan, or maybe she had been working with someone else. Either way, Sarah's actions were no longer a matter of survival. There was a deeper, more insidious motive at play. "We need to keep moving," Rachel said, trying to steady her racing heart. "We'll talk more later, but right now, we need to focus on getting out of here." Jake nodded, though his face was still tense with worry. The rest of the group, oblivious to the conversation, continued to follow Rachel in silence, their eyes scanning the dark passageways ahead. As they moved further into the tunnels, Rachel's mind was consumed by the possibilities. Was Sarah working with another group? Had she known about the zombies' spread from the beginning, or was there something far worse that Rachel couldn't even imagine? If Sarah wasn't just trying to survive like the rest of them, what had she truly been after? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from ahead, too loud to be their own. Rachel froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The rest of the group also stopped, sensing the change in the atmosphere. In the absolute silence of the tunnels, the footsteps grew louder, and Rachel realized with a sickening jolt that the noise wasn't coming from the direction they had been walking. "Someone's coming," Rachel whispered, her voice tense with fear. They all turned to look at her, eyes wide with uncertainty. Rachel's mind raced. Was it another group of survivors? Or had Sarah led them into a trap? "There's nowhere to hide down here," Rachel muttered. "We have to face whatever's coming. Stay quiet." The sound grew closer, and the shadows around them seemed to lengthen, stretching toward them as if the darkness itself were alive, hungry. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she pressed herself against the cold stone wall, hoping the others would do the same. They couldn't afford to make a sound. The footsteps were growing louder, almost deafening now. Rachel's heart was pounding so hard she thought it would burst from her chest. Her flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows across the tunnel. The uncertainty was unbearable, and her mind raced for answers. Could Sarah be with them? Was she leading them right into the arms of the enemy? The figure finally emerged from the shadows, a single person, a figure cloaked in ragged clothing. A survivor. Rachel tensed, her breath shallow, and the group instinctively took a step back. But then, the figure spoke, its voice low and gravelly, yet familiar. "Rachel?" The figure's voice was weak, but unmistakable. Rachel's heart stopped. It was Sarah. But something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. The air around Rachel seemed to thicken as Sarah emerged from the shadows, her presence so sudden, so unexpected, that it took a moment for her to fully process the situation. Sarah stood there, barely illuminated by the flickering light of their torches, her face gaunt and pale, her hair matted with grime and blood. Her eyes, once warm and full of life, now held an unsettling emptiness, as though she had been hollowed out by something far worse than just the apocalypse. "Sarah?" Rachel's voice cracked with disbelief, her heart hammering in her chest. She wanted to reach out, to pull her close, but the cold, uneasy tension between them stopped her. She remembered Sarah's words before they had been separated, "I'm not one of them, but I'm not one of you either." The words seemed to echo in Rachel's mind, growing louder, more ominous with every passing second. Sarah's lips curled into a twisted, half-smile. She took a step forward, her gaze fixed on Rachel. "You're surprised to see me. I'm not the person you thought I was, am I?" Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of some dark truth Rachel wasn't ready to face. Rachel felt a chill creep down her spine, every nerve on edge. "What happened to you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though the fear was unmistakable. You ran. Why did you leave us behind?" Sarah's eyes flickered with something Rachel couldn't quite read, guilt? Regret? Or maybe it was something darker, something far more sinister. She stepped into the light, revealing her tattered clothes, the hollowed-out look in her eyes, as though she had become something less than human, but more than a zombie. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Sarah murmured, as if to herself. "I thought I could survive on my own, I thought I could stay hidden. But everything's falling apart, Rachel. Everything." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice growing more urgent. "What happened to you? You can't just—" "I wasn't alone when I left," Sarah cut her off, her voice suddenly sharp. She looked directly at Rachel now, her eyes filled with a coldness that sent a wave of unease crashing over her. "I've been with someone. Someone who knows how to survive in this world. Someone who understands it. And now you're all here, in the way. You're going to ruin everything." Rachel's mind reeled as she tried to comprehend Sarah's words. Someone else? Had Sarah been working with another group all along? Was she part of a faction that had turned the world into a brutal game of survival, a twisted new order where betrayal was the only law? Who is it? Rachel asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. Who are you working with? You didn't just abandon us. You left because you chose to. You chose them. Sarah's eyes flickered with a hint of something, shame, perhaps, or fear. It disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a hardened mask. You wouldn't understand. You're too naive, Rachel. You still think there's hope for people, for this world. But there isn't. There's no turning back now. Rachel's pulse quickened. No turning back from what? Sarah, you need to tell me what you're involved in. We've been fighting to survive, to make it through this. But this is something else. You can't expect us to just follow you, to pretend that everything's okay. Sarah took a step forward, her gaze locked on Rachel with a dangerous intensity. You don't get it, do you? The world you knew is gone. There's no fighting it anymore. The zombies, the apocalypse, it's all part of something bigger. The virus didn't just change the dead. It changed us too. We have to adapt, Rachel. And sometimes, to survive, you have to do things you never thought you'd be capable of. Rachel's stomach twisted into knots as the pieces started to fall into place. Sarah had known. She had known long before anyone else had realized the true horror of the situation. But why? Why had she chosen to work with whoever this someone was? Was it a cult? A group of survivors with a twisted agenda? The questions piled on top of one another, each one darker than the last. I didn't leave because I wanted to, Sarah continued, her voice low and dangerous now. I left because I had to. They needed me. And they need you, too. Whether you like it or not. Rachel's mind raced, the words echoing in her head. Who are they? Sarah's eyes flashed with something cruel. Does it matter? They'll find you, just like they found me. They'll always find you. She stepped closer to Rachel, her voice barely a whisper now, a warning in her tone. And when they do, you'll wish you had stayed hidden like I did. Rachel felt the weight of Sarah's words settle on her chest like a heavy stone. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to get away from this twisted version of Sarah who had clearly lost touch with what it meant to be human. But Rachel couldn't help but feel a spark of curiosity. What had Sarah seen? What had she learned that had turned her so cold, so distant? Suddenly, the sound of shuffling feet interrupted their conversation. The distant moan of zombies echoed down the tunnel, growing louder. Sarah's expression shifted, becoming something more calculating, almost pleased. They're here, Sarah said with a hint of something like anticipation. They'll want to talk to you. They'll want you to join us, too. It's your choice. But remember, if you don't, you'll be just another victim. Just another body for the horde. Rachel's heart pounded in her chest. The group was trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Sarah had just opened a door to something even darker than the zombie outbreak itself. And now, Rachel had to make a choice. Stay with her old friend, or face the unknown horrors that Sarah had embraced. But in that moment, Rachel knew one thing for certain: survival in this world didn't just mean fighting the undead. It meant fighting the monsters among the living. The air in the subway tunnel grew thick with tension as Sarah stood before Rachel, her eyes cold and calculating. The distant growls of the approaching zombies echoed louder, closer now, their relentless march toward them like a ticking clock. Each step they took seemed to shake the very foundation of the world Rachel once knew. Rachel's mind raced, caught between the sickening betrayal she felt and the cold, hard reality of the situation. Sarah, the girl she once trusted, had transformed into something unrecognizable. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she was part of something much darker. And now, it was clear, the choice wasn't just about survival. It was about choosing whether to fight for what was left of humanity or to surrender to a new, terrifying existence where trust meant nothing. Sarah's voice broke through her thoughts, a sharp edge to her tone. You can't run from this, Rachel. They'll find you, just like they found me. The zombies? They're only the beginning. The real monsters are the ones who will tear you apart when you least expect it. Rachel swallowed hard, her throat dry, as the words sank in. Her eyes flicked to the rest of the group. Jake, who had once been a pillar of strength, looked more fragile than ever. His eyes darted between Rachel and Sarah, his jaw clenched in silent tension. The others, too, seemed uncertain, fearful, but also eager for a resolution, anything to stop the madness from consuming them entirely. Rachel felt a surge of anger flood her chest. "I won't be a part of this, Sarah. Not with you, not with them. This isn't about surviving. This is about letting the worst of humanity control everything. And I won't let it happen." Sarah's expression faltered for just a moment, a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe pity, flashing in her eyes. But it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by a hardness that made Rachel's blood run cold. "You think you have a choice, Rachel? You think you can just walk away from this? The world is already lost. People like us, we're the ones who decide what happens next. And if you don't join us, you'll be consumed by it. Just like everyone else." Rachel stood her ground, her resolve hardening. She turned to Jake and the others. "We don't have to be part of this. We can make it out of here. Together." For a moment, the group seemed to hesitate, uncertainty and fear clouding their faces. But Rachel knew that if they allowed Sarah's words to infect them, they would all fall into the same trap she had. There was still hope left, but only if they fought for it. A low moan echoed down the tunnel, snapping Rachel back to the reality of their situation. The zombies were almost upon them. Their ragged, twisted forms emerged from the darkness, shuffling toward them with an unholy hunger. But it wasn't the zombies Rachel was afraid of anymore. It was Sarah and the unknown forces she had aligned herself with. "We have to go. Now!" Rachel shouted, her voice shaking but firm. Without waiting for a response, she turned and began to move, her feet quickening with each step as she led the group deeper into the tunnels. They couldn't afford to stop, not for a second. Not when Sarah's shadow was so close, and the horde was right behind them. But Sarah wasn't going to let them escape that easily. With a sharp, cruel laugh, she called out, her voice echoing through the darkness. "You can run, Rachel. You can fight. But you'll never outrun what's coming. You'll never outrun me." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she pushed forward, her mind focused only on survival. She could hear the others behind her, their footsteps quickening as they followed her lead. There was no time for doubt, no time for second-guessing. All that mattered now was getting out, getting away from Sarah and the horrors she had embraced. As they turned a corner in the tunnels, Rachel's flashlight flickered, casting wild, distorted shadows across the walls. The eerie silence that had settled over them was shattered by a deafening roar of growls. The zombies were closing in. Rachel pushed harder, the darkness closing in around them. The distant screams of the undead filled the air, and in the chaos, Rachel couldn't help but glance back. She saw Sarah's silhouette lingering in the shadows, watching them, her figure unmoving as if waiting for something. But what? To see them fall? To watch them become just another part of the monster-filled world she had joined? With each step, Rachel's heart grew heavier. She didn't know if they would make it out alive. She didn't know if they could outrun Sarah's twisted alliance, or if they could escape the horde of zombies closing in on them. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going to stop fighting. She couldn't afford to. As the light at the end of the tunnel grew closer, Rachel pushed forward, feeling a spark of hope ignite within her chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep moving. Sarah's voice echoed one final time from the darkness behind them. "You can't outrun fate, Rachel. The world is over." Rachel didn't answer. She just ran. They all ran. And for the first time since the outbreak began, Rachel felt the bitter sting of the truth. There was no place to hide anymore. The only choice left was to fight.